Good morning. We all seek happiness, but we often experience unnecessary suffering. All human beings seek purpose, but we often find a lack of purpose. Aristotle said that human beings want to know what's true. John Keats said, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever." And the Beatles said, "All we need is love." So we are truth seekers, beauty seekers, and love seekers. And the world offers itself to us so that we can experience something profound if we are motivated by a significant purpose. Our basic ground, in other words, the first principles that guide our lives must offer us a basis by which we can experience the greatest value. So, for example, it's necessary for us to understand the foundation by which we seek value, purpose, meaning, by which we seek what is true, what is beautiful, and what is good. If we fail to examine the ground upon which we seek these things, there's often inconsistency, conflict, and unfortunately, suffering. So we have to examine carefully what is the consistent ground by which we relate to our world. What are our first principles? What is our worldview? Now, in existentialism, for example, that has so dominated the 20th century, there's a basic understanding that the world makes no sense, that essentially we are living in an absurd world, but it's our responsibility to create some meaning out of that absurdity. And if you've read any of the literature of the 20th century, from Camus' Myth of Sisyphus, where Sisyphus is rolling a rock up a hill, it comes back rolling down, and he has to roll the rock up again eternally. Kind of absurd situation. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a play called No Exit, where in the play it says, "Hell is other people." That is, and of course, Waiting for Godot, the famous play where someone is waiting, wondering if Godot is going to come. They're not sure who Godot is or if he already came. So much modern art illustrates an existential point of view that ultimately there's no meaning and no sense, but we're confronted with creating meaning anyway. And of course, there are ethical good people who seek to create meaning, but often there's inconsistency. And in specific situations, there's no understanding of a profound engagement of the self with the world. Unfortunately, in the United States, we've come a long way from the foundation of our country, where the founders spoke a great deal about the common good. Very often a term often used by all of the founders. Now, what's characteristic, and what many writers talk about, is how we have fallen into the trap of radical individualism. That essentially we are all spinning ourselves, and if we happen to connect with somebody else, that's good. If we don't connect, that's too bad. But basically, we seek what will give us some value and meaning, and often in material terms. So the radical individualism often allows us to enter into contracts with other people, just like when you buy something. When you buy something, if you don't like it, my wife's Verizon phone had a malfunction, but it was under warranty. Went back to the Verizon store. They said, "Oh, yes, you're still under warranty. We'll give you a new phone if you pay $20 to have it shipped to your house." In other words, many of our relationships are contractual relationships because there is no inherent relationship between us other than I give you this, you give me that. The basis of actually a free market society is a contractual basis. Unlike what the founders realized was relationship is based on covenant. That is, we have a relationship because we are bound together as a human family, as a human community, as a national community. Another worldview is one where we emphasize the survival of the fittest. So we want wealth or power, pleasure, usually sexual pleasure. Our culture has become eroticized. From the youngest children to the oldest people, the emphasis is how can you experience sexual pleasure? And of course, the result of much of that is a sense where we exploit each other. We violate each other. Even the youngest children, we fail to value innocence. One of the beautiful things about a school where we can protect children is we protect their innocence. Innocence is very precious. Once innocence is violated, there are scars. A number of us went yesterday to a symposium at Mills College dealing with how, at different stages of growth, young people have to be nourished with love and with care. And at those vulnerable points, if they are violated, that scar is very difficult to heal over a lifetime. Another worldview offers terrorism, kind of fundamentalism. And in most religions, there is always a fundamentalism that says we have what it takes to be what's true, everything else is false, but it's so false that we must destroy that which is false. So we have these Islamic terrorists who are killing innocent people, also who profess Islam, in the name of some greater good. And terrorism often attracts people because it offers an absolute. Well, even if you die, you're a martyr. You go to the world and will be blessed by God. There's a crazy sense that somehow it doesn't matter what happens in the world, but somehow once we reach the spiritual realm, we will be rewarded. And so we can kill people insouciantly, without much care. Now, the principal ideal of relationship emphasizes that human beings are bound together in relationship. We're born in relationship. We're bound together in relationship. That if we are truth seekers, the world offers itself in a truthful way. The world is knowable. If we seek beauty, the world offers itself to that which is our desire for beauty. The world is a beautiful reality. I went to a fundraiser for Saving Mount Diablo last week, and a famous landscape photographer took photographs of Mount Diablo. Often just parts of a tree or parts of the moss on the ground, and it was spectacular. Once you looked at these things, sort of like when you're hiking, you can't always see the moss or the part of the tree, and it was like a beautiful experience because the photographer had the sensibility of seeing the beauty in every object, the simplest object, the most humble object. And the same thing with love. It's almost that love is that unifying force within us that seeks the well-being of the other. To want to know something, if you're a scholar, for example, or anyone interested in a subject, to know it well, you actually love your subject. The same thing, if you experience beauty, you connect with it. It's nourishing something. So love is like that connecting force, the foundation for the lawfulness, the beauty that we seek in the world, and the core of our desire to create that which is well, that which is good. I see that as the principle posits the idea that the core of our being is a loving core. It's like all of life energy is a love energy, but we have to direct that energy based upon certain principles. So the question is then, we're bound together in relationship. What's the quality of our relationship? Happiness and value are realized through relationship based on norms. Principles are norms. So, for example, if we want to understand something, we have to know it deeply. If you want to understand another person, for example, if you want to love another person, you can't really love them deeply unless you know how they suffer, unless you know in an empathic way and a compassionate way how to respond to someone who needs love. Same thing with beauty. If you study art, the more you know about art, both from a historical point of view, from a biographical point of view, for the impact upon art and society. In other words, a theory of art will involve not only the biography of the artist, but the cultural history of the work of art, and then the impact of the work of art on the larger culture. So to experience the relationship with the work of art, we need that systemic understanding of how beauty works and how deeply we can learn to be appreciators of art. So the greater the knowledge, the greater the love. So music, I've heard some of these people playing music now for 40 years, but they play with all their spirit, with all their heart, and they keep learning new songs and new ideas, and it's a beautiful thing to see them evolve in terms of their understanding of creating beautiful music. So we have the ability to be happy makers and value makers. Each human being has a great power. We can actually bring joy to others, and we can create value if we are grounded in particular principles. So it's necessary, though, to understand that these principles and norms don't just happen to us. We have to develop these norms, these principles over a lifetime. There are stages of growth. So, for example, the youngest children in the Principled Academy, we talk about even the youngest child is able to connect with, relate to others. The youngest child feels a sense of what others feel. Christina just showed pictures of her new grandson, and he smiles even though he's very young. And the smile is a response to the parent or the grandparent smiling at the child. So there's a connection. We are ground and bound in connectedness to others from those very first moments, even in utero. Then that sense of connectedness is an empathic sense. The grandparent or the parent smiling at the child feels that love or that smile. The child obviously is not developed enough to understand the quality of love that the parent or the grandparent has, but at that early stage, a child can respond and feel connected to, empathic with the parent or the grandparent. But that feeling of empathy has got to be nourished at every stage of growth. In that symposium yesterday, a person talking about the development of the brain, and she spoke largely about adolescence. At every stage, children can learn to deepen their sense of empathy, until ideally in life we develop a compassionate sense. So there's no end of learning in life. When they talk about lifelong learning is a sense of developing empathy and compassion throughout life. You never stop. You never say, well, now I have enough love. I don't need to relate to you anymore with any greater compassion. What else do you want? I'm at 98%. Every day, and for example, to our wife or our husband, we have to say, I love you every day in some new way. That's our burden of being creative. Now, people can say, even with religion, well, religion makes me feel guilty. Relationships make me feel guilty. What does that mean? From a different point of view, a principled perspective, it means you have to be responsible for love. There are times we don't feel like loving or relating to another person. Well, that may be true at times. We all need to be alone at times and allow ourselves to reflect on our own being. But basically, we are bound together, whether we like it or not, in relationship. So that empathy has got to be nourished at every grade level to become a principled person, a loving, beautiful, truth-seeking being. That's our responsibility at every moment, in every stage of life. In a similar way, children begin with a sense of fairness. Very early on, you talk to the preschool teachers, the kids are very much aware of, oh, well, you've had that toy for so long, I want it now. Kids look for fairness. And that fairness has also got to be nourished at every stage of growth so that kids become responsible for social justice. Fairness ideally develops to a point where we become individuals who are truly responsible for the good. Now, the reason is because we have a covenantal relationship with people like we do with God. So, for example, the idea of our culture right now, and I don't talk about politics, but so many articles in the last few days where people who are on food stamps will be getting $6 less a year for their food stamps, which comes down to 1 quart of milk instead of 2 quarters of milk for the children. 25% of children in America live in homes that are essentially poor. Now we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and 25% of our children are living in homes that are poor, not getting adequate care. What does this mean? Have we developed an empathic, compassionate society? Is that not the goal of life in society? To build a compassionate and empathic society where we seek love and justice, fairness. So what's necessary in understanding how to create value is that we look at our nature, our purpose, then we can understand value. We are material beings. We're individuals, in terms of our purpose, and we have potential value. But we're also moral beings or spiritual beings. That's our nature. It's important to understand our nature. Then we can understand how to fulfill that nature. If we understand our nature, then we have a basis to understand our purpose. A car is meant to start the ignition and transport you from one place to another. I happen to be fond of a radio in the car, and for a while I thought those big machines were just big radios. When you think your car is just a radio, then it's not fulfilling its purpose. Well, the same thing with the human being. We always have to be in touch with what is our nature. So we have a material nature. We do need to eat, drink, dance, whatever. And we have a moral nature. We have the ability to love. It's a responsibility to love in an ethical way. So also, we have an individual purpose. We fulfill our lives. We're always thinking, well, what will make me happy today? What will make me happy tomorrow? Well, we also have a purpose to seek the well-being of others. Hillel said, if I'm only for myself, what good for? But if I'm only for others, who's going to be for me? In other words, we have to be bound together in relationship to fulfill ourselves. The trick of the Chinese puzzle, if you keep pulling apart, you never can get your fingers out of it. It's only if you loosen up that the puzzle, opens up. So as we seek our well-being in connectedness to others, we realize our full value. Every human being has got this potential value. It's like little t's, little b's, little l's. We have the truthful, beautiful, loving, seeking nature, but that has to be actualized. That's a potential value. Within each of us, we have great value. With kids, especially important to tell them, you have great value. You are going to be doing some very important things in life, whatever they choose to do, music, art, science, technology. Children have to be told. One of the nice things to do when kids get a good grade on the test, right next to it, Yale, Harvard, Stanford, so they feel, yeah, even though they're in middle school or whatever, kids realize, I'm going to do something important. I'm a valuable person. From preschool throughout life, we have to continually remind ourselves we are important people going to do important things.